They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight on Rogueways, I am so grateful that we are given the connection with this powerful human who has brought so many to their own strength and power through teaching, coaching, and providing the opportunity to heal truly and completely all of our traumas. That's a big job, and she does it with wisdom, grace, and beauty wrapped up in her channel on YouTube and in everything she does. Irene Lyon, welcome to Rogueways. It's a supreme pleasure to have you here, and how are you doing tonight?
Wow, I'm good. That's like the most enthusiastic intro I've ever had. So I feel like I'm on a football field. So it's good.
Pump it up, pump it up.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And I want to let everyone out there know who's listening. I was doing the Mother's Day sale on the site, and I had the code, Blessed Mother was the coupon code. And then I realized it doesn't have to only be gifts for your mother. So I'm going to keep that going for another few days or maybe a week because we all have mothering aspects to ourselves, and we probably all need to receive a little bit more self-care and nurturing. So if you want to pamper yourself in honor of being motherly, or the mother, or the divine feminine within you, which all of us have, then go use the coupon code Blessed Mother and grab yourself. Anything on the site now has that coupon code's availability. So that's my gift to you in honor of mothers everywhere, Mother's Day and the divine feminine. All right, Irene, pointless question of the episode. How do you feel about mothers and Mother's Day?
Pretty neutral. I am not a biological mother myself.
Me either.
I'm a stepmom. And I have a mom. She's still alive. And yeah, it's funny. Like, my family and I were never very celebratory around these kind of Hallmark holidays, if we want to call them that. So like, I didn't even see my mom today, but we'll have dinner tomorrow night. So that's like my Mother's Day thing. And there's wounds all throughout various mother related things. Some people had really great mother relationships. Others, it was, they're the biggest abuse and traumas of their lives. And so, yeah, for me, it's very neutral.
Yeah.
I've done my own healing around stuff, and you just never know. There's always maybe things to bubble up again. But yeah, that's my Mother Day thing.
Yeah, it's totally true. It was interesting too. Recently, I had Josh Slocum on the show, who you may or may not know. He does a show called Disaffected Podcast, which you would be a great guest for him too. And he's just an awesome person with an awesome show. But we were talking too about how you can give birth to and raise someone who becomes or is a borderline personality disorder, or a narcissist, or a psychopath by no fault of your own, and you can become the abused as well, right? Or many other ways that you could become the abused of your own child. So it's really interesting how many ways that can go. It's definitely not all fun and roses, although Hallmark would like you to believe it is.
Yes, they would.
Sells better.
I think more and more people are being alerted to the fact that it isn't all roses and chocolates and that. I think that I'm a much more what's the word I'm looking for? Intentional about posting stuff like that, say on my professional feeds. I keep my family off of there and keep them private, and also I'm seeing folks be more vocal about how it's not just a happy day. When we think of people who have miscarried, whose children's have, been taken from them too young, and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's an interesting one, the Mother's Day. To me, Mother's Day should be the birthday of the child.
Oh, that's sweet.
Technically, that was the day that they became a mother. So that's my way of looking at it.
Yeah. And there's probably, I bet we could find some root of this day that is actually was celebrated for some astrological reason or something,
Maybe.
somewhat related, but not exactly this, because they tend to just pave over with
Yeah.
the old, with the thing that makes more money.
Hmm.
It sells more products. So it is very interesting. Well, do you come from a background of suffering from trauma or abuse? Is that how you got into what you do, or was that just an incidental something that you just
No.
developed a love for? How did it all happen?
Yeah, well, it's a long story, so I don't know how I'll start from the somewhat beginning. No, I was not someone who thought that I had what we would deem trauma.
Mm.
And we can dive into that more because the definition even of trauma is inaccurate in many ways when we consider a person's nervous system, which is kind of my main thing,
Yeah.
is working with the nervous system. But no, I got into this work because I was in private practice doing what we would call mind body work through something called the Feldenkrais method. I
Yeah.
don't know if you, okay, so I was a Feldenkrais or am a Feldenkrais practitioner, like late 20s. I'm 46, 47 this year. So quite a while ago. And I got into the Feldenkrais work because of some more physical traumas to my body through my sport.
Ah.
And so I got into that because it was the only thing that helps me recover from orthopedic injury, orthopedic surgeries. And I was trained in exercise rehabilitation and fitness. So I actually knew a lot about the human body, but everything I had learned, surprise, surprise, in university wasn't helping me heal. So I got into the Feldenkrais work, fell in love with it, changed everything in my system. And then as I started to practice, Lindsay, I realized that like a very large portion of my clients, students, they were not getting better in the way I had gotten better with the Feldenkrais method. And so that's when I kind of I'm like, what am I missing? I've just been to school for 15 years. There's more. And so that's when I got into the work of what some people know, somatic experiencing, the work of Peter Levine. Now years later, I don't just do somatic experiencing. I have a whole other bucket load of trauma tools within my repertoire. But that was my entry point into learning how, when we've had bad things happen to us, scary things happen to us, and even cultural things that are deemed acceptable but are actually very conditioned based in the human world, how that stuff kind of throws our nervous system, off of regulation, off of flow, off of homeostasis. And so it was the summer of 2008, and I was working with clients, and there was like maybe 4 people that I was working with that summer of 08, where no matter what I did with my current toolkit, they were not bouncing back into goodness. I'm like, okay, something's going on here. And then I still remember most of them. One had been in a propane explosion, so recovering from 3rd-degree burns. There's a trauma we don't think of very often. One had been bucked off a horse when she was really, really young and didn't break or paralyze anything, but the shock was still, in her tissues, in her physiology. I don't remember how old she was, but let's say 30 years later. Another gentleman had fallen off of a cliff. I was living in a mountain town at the time in Whistler, British Columbia. And so he was a ski patroller on the hill, fell off of a cliff, didn't break anything, nothing like significant, but year or 2 later, he was still bouncing around to physio, chiro, massage, and still in this kind of pain cycle, and nobody could figure it out. So he ended up in my, studio, thinking that the Feldenkrais work was what he needed. And I thought that maybe that's what he needed in it. And that was a part of it, but that's like a more advanced practice. And so that was one guy. And then another person who was kind of like my first initiation into working with severe abuse, trauma, came in with a frozen shoulder, which is an orthopedic trouble. And, bounced again through all the people in the village, the valley, to try to get the shoulder working again. It was still frozen, so much pain. And I took one look at her and I was like, you look like a bird that's literally had its broken wings and can't fly. And, that's a whole other story that we could get into. But working with her made me realize, whoa, we trap not just emotion, but traumatic response in our tissues, in our organs, yes, in our brain, but it's actually mostly in our body. And then these ailments come out that we see as separate. And it's really no one's fault other than the fact that we're just learning about this now. And so we had to work with the early abuse, being restrained while being attacked, all these things. But that shoulder got frozen, not because of another assault, but because of falling on the ski hill and breaking some ribs. And so the breaking of the ribs, in this woman's adult life created a pattern of her having to, I'm going to do this with my arms, like get really tight and protect. Because if you've ever broken ribs, it bloody hurts. You can't breathe deep. You can't laugh. You can't sneeze. Or if you do, it's like, ugh. And so that pattern of her protecting her ribs and her arm going really close to her body mimicked the events that occurred when she was young, where she was tied down to things, right, while she was abused. And so we had to work with that, not just memory in the brain, but the physical memories and the stored stress of not being able to break away because she was so little, and not being able to run and seek help because there was no one to help her in that moment when you're like, between the ages of 5 and 10. So that was my initiation. I wasn't looking for that as a career, if you will. It was just kind of the next progression to, okay, I think I want to keep working with humans.
Yeah.
I think. And there's something missing here. And oh, shoot, there's this work of somatic experiencing. We store this stuff. Humans end up with PTSD. Animals in the wild don't, because they either are the ones predating or they die, right? There's very little leeway in the wild. Yeah. So that just doesn't happen. But we as humans, we are so amazingly different in that we have modern medicine that keeps us alive. We have this higher brain that can actually micro manage emotion and even expression of our biology. But what we know, Lindsay, is that this work or this situation many of us are in, it creates illness, creates mental illness, chronic illness, relational troubles, addiction. It creates the cycle of continuing the abuse with the kiddos. So that is my very long way of saying I got into this work because I was already working with humans, saw a very big missing piece, got into Peter Levine's work, and then even from there realized even his work wasn't the whole piece. There's working with early trauma and surgical trauma and all these other things. And then you have to bring, the person's experience, their foundational levels, what do they even want to believe that they have animal physiology in them, right? It's very hard to work at this level if a person denies that they are a human, but within that human being, there is an actual mammal that needs to fight and needs to defend and needs to shut down and all those things.
Yeah. What a beautiful way of honoring our actual system and how it actually works, and finding the way for people that is so diverse for everybody. It's unique to everybody and it's so varied, and you're bringing so much wisdom to be able to do that. It's very rare, and what most of us get instead is a pill or a band-aid or slap in the face and a kick out the door. Like there's just not a lot of actual care, nurturing, support, and there's definitely not a lot of what you're talking about there, actually understanding that specific organism's path. And that's really amazing. So I love that you do all of that. What is the definition of trauma? You were saying there's a different.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is where it's not cut and dry. If you were to watch a TV show like, say, ER or Grey's Anatomy, for those that are younger, they would call it the trauma wing or the trauma surgeon or whatever, right? And so, yeah, there's what we would consider the big bad events where there's, a bone that's sticking out, and bring them to the trauma unit, get them fixed up. That's one way of looking at it, and I'm fine with that. But then there's this other definition of trauma in the somatic fields, which is that the trauma is not in the actual event, like the attack, the accident, but it's in the nervous system itself. And it's in the dysregulation of the nervous system. And then if we take it even one step deeper, if we think of little people who are brought up in toxic environments, and not necessarily what we would consider abusive, right? Because there's so many that'll listen to this and go, I know, not me. We had food and shelter, and I got hugs from mom, and went to school and had ski lessons, and nothing traumatic happened. And that is accurate. And then there's also the little hits of conditioning of, I'll hug you when you get grade A, an A, or go to your room if you're being naughty, or time out. That's a huge one that I don't know where that came from. It certainly wasn't around when I was little, but like, go sit on the stairs, go be alone. So someone might see from the outside, well, that kid isn't being handled improperly. They're not being hit. They're not being neglected. But that is, we could say, yeah, that isn't necessarily a trauma like the abuse, the attack, but it is an insult to that little one's sense of safety and connection. And then when you disturb that, their internal physiology goes into a state of dysregulation, that, the classic fight flight. But typically in those situations, we would call more of a freeze response,
like a disassociation.
It's a dissociation, but it's also kind of a shutdown at the body level, because it's too painful to feel the isolation, especially when you're 3 and you have no idea what is happening, or 5 or 7 or whenever, usually.
Or what about infancy, where people are doing the cry it out thing? I'm like,
oh yeah,
sorry, I don't want to like hurt anyone.
No,
but that seems horrible to me.
It's a no. And so one would say, well, that's not a trauma, that's just how do I say this, that's just one way of parenting. And I say, okay, would an animal in the wild, like a mother bear, leave her cubs alone in a dark room and let them cry all night? Of course not. That would never happen unless something is really wrong with the mother bear and she's hurt, or she's been taken. Right. And so you're right. Yeah. Crying it out, not good. But what's happening is, like, okay, are those traumas? I would say yes, because it's disturbing the nervous system. But for some, it's a little hard to land on that word. And so that's where the definition is that it's more what's occurring internally in the physiology. And then if I take it one step further, Lindsay, if we have 2 people who have the exact same accident, let's just say this is my classic example, and it's a real minor car accident, like nothing is broken, no need for insurance exchange, just a little bump. Person A might walk away fine, like really fine. They're fine. They like, other than that was a pain in the butt, now I'm late for my thing, but they have no trouble driving again. They have no panic when they, see a car come close to them. They have no trouble sleeping that night. They eat, their appetite is fine. They are drinking water just like a happy animal, right? Fine. But then you might have someone who has the exact same accident, exact same scenario, same impact. They walk away from that a mess. They don't want to go in the car anymore. They jump at the side of anything vehicle related. They can't sleep that night. Their guts go all crazy. They get sick. They don't want to leave their house. And this might seem extreme, but I've seen that when I was in private practice. Someone comes in, fairly benign accident, but the symptomology is just through the roof. What you find when you start to ask questions is that their system was so overfull with chaos and shutdown. And as you start to work with them, they'll say things like, Oh yeah. I'm thinking of one person in particular. Yeah, I had to pay all the bills when I was 8 years old. Like what? Yeah,
It
my
was normal
parents were.
though. I'm not traumatized by it. You're like, okay.
Yeah, my parents were. They were drinking often, or they were always at work. It doesn't have to be something like alcoholism, or it could be parents were out all the time because they were working because they needed to,
Right.
right? For whatever reason. And then you kind of start going, oh, and there's that, and then there was this, and oh yeah, and then there was that time that yeah, I fell off my bike and I broke my arm, but we didn't know for a month later, and I kept that all in. So you start hearing this history, and it's like this big box that's just overflowing with events that were never processed.
Yeah.
And then they get the car accident at age 25, or they go to university and they're stressed because they don't know how to study. And then it unleashes what we would consider or call a complex post-traumatic stress response. But then I say this with quotes, the normal medical world is like, well, you're fine. You look
Yeah.
fine. This is where the whole it's all in their head. They're making it up. And while there is psychosomatic stuff that is real, these people don't, they also don't realize why they're so affected by this minor accident, because they really do think that their life has been relatively
Mm-hmm.
normal.
Because
Normal.
you don't always know too what normal's even supposed to be when you grow up in chaos, especially. And I relate to this, and I have people who I work with too who they're, I'll ask them, like, oh, okay, so this seems like it could be connected to a trauma. Is there a trauma? No, 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 no trauma. And then later, like, well, my mom left me when I was 3, and then my dad died when I was 4. I'm like, well, I mean, that's
And
a
I
lot of
lived with my
trauma.
aunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like,
uh,
okay.
okay. But I also relate because I didn't even know I had I have complex post-traumatic stress syndrome. Didn't know I had it until I was like 30. I'm 40 now. I think I was like
Right.
33. And
Mm.
I was, because I thought, and where most of us are told, my audience hears this all the time, that I thought that's for people who went to war and like did horrible things and received horrible like treatment and just
And that's true
chaos.
too. Yeah.
Yeah. But you don't think about that it can be from a normal life, and I definitely had my traumas. I just didn't realize
Mm-hmm.
what happened. But everything you're describing makes so much sense to me because I've also had that question: why do some people experience something that seems minor, but then they go straight into PTSD? And you're like, well, what happened? And what your description of it's like they were already almost there, and then that was like what broke it.
The straw that
That
broke the
makes,
camel's back.
yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many instances where people are like, how can some folks who do receive insane abuse and trauma? I'm actually thinking about a gentleman who was sort of in the limelight. They featured him in a movie with Jodie Foster, um, The Mauritanian.
Hmm.
Did you ever come across that?
No.
It's called I think it's The Mauritanian, meaning from Mauritania, the country in Africa.
Yeah.
His name is Mohamedou. I can't pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try. It starts with an S. And he was wrongly accused and put into Guantanamo Bay for like something like
Oh yeah.
15 years. It's an insane amount. In the Canadian government here was partly responsible for his wrongful conviction. He never went to trial, slapped into Guantanamo, deeply tortured and abused. It's a great movie, and Jodie Foster is amazing in it.
Now I want to see it.
She plays the lawyer that gets him out, actually, and she is still alive and working on these sorts of cases. But you watch something like that, and I've listened to probably 6 hours of interviews on podcasts where people are interviewing him, like Michaela Peterson, Jordan Peterson, various people. And you sit there and you go, how is this man smiling and compassionate for his abusers? And he'll admit he has some PTSD. He's aware of it. He's working on it. But that goes back to that person A and B situation. He was most likely, from what I can tell, listening to his history, had a really solid, connected, secure upbringing.
Wow.
Right? Not in the Western world, more probably connected with family, of course, very deeply religious, and just solid nervous system foundations. And so, I look at that and I go, we actually can endure a lot of stuff when we have that solid foundation. But what's occurring in so many instances in hundreds and hundreds of millions of people is this upbringing, these first, really, it's the first 3 to 4 years, and of course in utero, where it's just a mess. And we haven't, there's no manual and there's no teaching, and there's books that specialists write, but there really is only, and this is going to sound radical, one way to raise a child, a human.
Yeah.
The way we would in the wild: protection, food when they're hungry, shelter, teaching them right from wrong. But then the human is a bit different because we have this strange thing called a higher brain and a cortex that is like super powerful. And so then we have to factor in this thing. And I believe in a soul. So the soul, the creative juices that come from this weird thing that is a human. So we're like dealing with a lot of hardware and software situations. But at the core level, those first 4-5 years of life are actually, in my opinion, and many would probably agree with me, they should be the same.
Yeah.
And sure, there might be some cultural differences, and baby eats this rather than this, and sure. But at the end of the day, we actually all have the innate blueprints for the same kind of thing. And then when that is laid down, then the human becomes exactly what they're supposed to be, which is what they're supposed to be. And it shouldn't be dictated, in my opinion, again, by the parents, by the church, by the school system, by society. And that's where then we have folk, older people, I call them the big people, who are literally so confused, can't follow their impulses. They don't know for them what is right from wrong because it was never actually like wired in from the very beginning. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense to me. And then
Cool.
I can see the compounding effect, right? Every generation is like, it's getting worse and worse, or it's getting better and better. And we hear that a lot of like, we want to break the cycle and break the chains. And hopefully that's what a lot of us are doing, because there's a lot to break. It's like, seems like this is compounded. When you were saying too, like this trauma goes back to, 3 to 4 and maybe even the womb. And then also we hear about epigenetics. So then we're like, well, where are the traumas from our ancestors are literally in there too. And we can get really woo-woo about that on the spiritual level too. But at the very least, we know that it's materialist and that we're dealing with that too. So like, yeah, there's so much. And when you're describing this, raising a child like you would as an animal in the wild, I'm like, oh, I feel so good about it. If I imagine having a baby, which I also never had, and I would keep it, it'd be like with me all the time. I don't want to over mother it, but I'm like, you're not going to take my baby from me. I'm not giving it to the school and not giving it to anyone else. And I'll try to maybe take a break sometimes and let someone really, really deeply trusted take care of the baby so I can go do whatever. But for the most part, I can't imagine not sleeping with it, not breastfeeding it, like not just like holding it and loving it all the time, and not from anything but that's what my heart and body feels like it would want to do. Yeah.
It's the intuitive. It's in our, I think it's even deeper than our DNA. It's just in the core cellular matrix of the universe. It's like that mothering energy is meant to do that. And I mean, the other thing that's so tricky again in our society is we're meant to have help. We're meant to have help from people who are aligned with us. And this is where it gets tricky, is you bring the baby to the grandma, or to, even if two people, let's say husband and wife, aren't in alignment for what to do, you got a problem there. Because then that little one is getting different signals. Right. And then you bring them to, maybe they have to go to a daycare. I mean, hopefully that would never happen super young, but that does happen. And then you have no idea, even though, what's going on there, and how does the helper pick the baby up? Are they freaking out, or are they actually more nurturing than the mother, because the mother doesn't know how to attune to herself? And it's just, it's a really interesting mess that we've gotten into. The good news, though, because I want to paint a positive note, is that I'm finding more and more young mothers, and those that haven't had babies, or those that, are just wanting to learn about this. Maybe they want to have kids, maybe not, realizing they got to heal their shit.
Yeah.
And moms are actually like saying, I really fucked my kid up.
Mm.
And they're owning it, as opposed to not taking responsibility, because they are learning that it's not their fault either, that they don't know what to do, right? They don't know what to do because they weren't brought up in that way. And then even their parents weren't brought up. And so the pointing of, you screwed me up and now I'm like this, that victim identification, of course, this isn't not everybody, but I'm seeing more of that lifting. And that's super cool.
Yeah. There is a point where in my own therapy, I had to first acknowledge how mad I was at my mother, because my mother wasn't the one that screwed up, supposedly, right? My father was alcoholic, and I had dealt with all that for so many years. And then I was like, she didn't do anything wrong. And then I was like, oh my God, she did. Yeah. Like she was the one who chose to be with an alcoholic in the first place, and then to stay for how long, and then all of this and this, and her own mistakes too. And that was like a shocker for me. And then to go past that even and get to the point where like, oh, I forgive you. You're just a person. You're just a fucked up person like everybody else. And I love you so much, actually. And this kind of full circle. And I think that both of those things are a hard place for people to get to. First, like, it's okay to be angry or to be sad or to recognize that one of your parents hurt you, even if it wasn't this abuse or horror or whatever. And also then acknowledge their just humanity, that they're just struggling to get by too, and forgive and release all of that. Because it's a big journey. But like you said, when you're healing yourself in that way, now you're not going to do that to anybody else. Right?
We hope not. We hope not. And that's, you're right. You know, that's the thing, is the more pieces we can restore in our own system, or layers break off, you know, the layers of whatever, we become more who we really are. And I am of the belief, as many of my colleagues, that no one is actually born evil. But it can happen the moment that little one is prodded, poked, not held well, not listened to. A lot of struggles that older humans have, the big people, we can bring it back to birth trauma and how they were handled by the nurses.
I was going to ask you about that.
And the doctors. And like, if you're having to get yanked out with the instruments that they might use, that's not a nice way to enter into this oxygen-rich earth world.
And then they smear your face with chemicals and then like take you somewhere else. And
they take you away. They do all the things. And, you know, so if you think about this brand new little one coming out, and their first exposure to oxygen and air outside of this cozy little area is not mistreatment, because it's not that they're trying to mistreat, but it's forceful. It doesn't feel good. It might hurt, you know, like baby skulls are so soft. And so to have something vacuum you out or clamp with metal is just like, ooh, right? And so that little physiology, because at that moment, that little one is not emotional and they don't know what's going on. They're not cognitively online. Everything is a sensation or a threat. And so you come into that world like with that threat, you're ready to fight something. And so what often doesn't occur, I mean, I hope it's getting a little bit better, and this is better with folks who are choosing doulas and midwifery and home births and all of that, or hospitals that are just a little more aware, is you can help heal that if that has to happen because of an intervention. But then, you know, you have to say, okay, we need to help this baby find calm again. Let them know that they're not needing to stay, you know, tight, or the opposite, in collapse, which can happen when there's too much stress at that early beginning. It's kind of like, are they living in a bit of a fight flight, or can they not handle that intensity? And so they kind of go limp. And this is where some babies will not make it, because they go into such a deep shutdown response that the whole physiology just tanks. You know, that's where you'll see a baby going blue or just not having that aliveness, and you want to get that back. So anyway, long story to say, there are so many ways that we get kind of messed with. And I do think that there's more understanding that that little one can feel. Because back in the day, they would operate on infants without any anesthesia,
No,
without any,
I mean they
sorry,
still are in a way. They
well,
cut
with
off. Yeah.
circumcision, that's another one. I mean, so
Ugh.
but I think I hope through most, I mean, I'm making a huge statement here, but my hope is that more and more in the medical and healthcare world are realizing that infants are feeling, breathing, living beings that should not be just handled as if they're not going to know that that's happened to them. They won't remember it cognitively, but it will come out in a panic attack when they're 35,
Yeah.
for example, right?
I literally just healed some what I really believe is like birth or
Yeah.
brand newborn trauma a few months ago. But I, when we're talking about this and what you're talking about, all the layers of ourselves are interconnected, right? And so I'm imagining too, like the trauma of our toxins in this world where we're like, okay, well, here's some baby food that's probably who got what chemicals in it or whatever, and then now we're growing up and here's a bunch of weird soap and stuff and none of it's all cancer causing and you're just this tiny body, so you've got all of those stresses and then this other craziness and then the way you were born and then like I'm always kind of amazed that any of us are still here doing well and like healing ourselves and all that. Yeah, how do we do this? But I think that's also gaining more awareness, like you're talking about, and that more people are understanding, okay, the less toxins around us the better, especially for our children while they're developing. And that gives me some hope too. But it really is this interconnected journey, and that's what I teach and help and hope people understand more and more too, is that it is your physical health and it's your mental health and it's your emotional health and it's your spiritual health, and they're all one thing actually. And when you're dealing with one, the others are going to pop in, and so it's this holistic thing. And I think more and more people are getting there too, where they're seeing like we are a fully functional holistic organism, we have to act like it.
I agree. I am seeing small little hints that people are getting that we can't separate. I mean, it used to be you can't separate the mind and the body. That's kind of an old saying. It's like, but even the mind body worlds, if we call it that, the industry of mind body teaching, it is also leaving out the environment. So that's a big, we could say, distinction when I work with folk, is we're not just noticing the feelings and what's happening inside, and we're connecting with the environment and orienting to it and noticing how our physiology responds to that environment, whether it's people or things or nature or those toxins that you just mentioned. And okay, so there's this survival stress reaction when you have this environment. What does that mean? How do you notice that? So there's kind of this interesting situation happening where I hope people are realizing that, okay, we really focused on the physical in the 80s with aerobics and movement. And then in the 90s, we kind of got into the nutrition thing. And yes, this is important. And then there was like all the core stuff with like Pilates and getting strong. And then there was the mind body, and people got into the yoga. Like, okay, well, no, don't do that. Now do this. And then meditation became a little more trendy. And then we got to like, really, I think it was only a couple of years ago where people are like, why am I still messed up?
Yeah, after all that.
I've done all that stuff. Like, why am I still freaking out when I have to go to Christmas dinner? Or why is my gut still super unwell? And I've cleaned my diet up. I've shifted away from the chemicals and that, and I still have IBS, or I still have migraine headaches, or I still can't sleep, and I'm doing all the Zen and I'm doing all the baths and the candles and the prayers and the journaling. Why am I still not able to just sleep and rest and feel rejuvenated in the morning? And the answer to that is, if there is deep dysregulation at that nervous system level, you can do all the stuff, but that core part of the system is running on survival stress. And that's the part. And so the interesting thing is when we get that piece in line, what's interesting, Lindsay, is that people actually start to know what they should eat. and they actually start becoming oddly spiritual, even though they'll claim, I'm not religious, right? I was like, it's okay.
It's fine, yeah.
You can pray to this tree or to the ocean, it doesn't matter, but you're feeling a connection, right, to something bigger than you, which is essentially what that is. Or they're starting to realize as they get into their nervous system better, oh my God, when I'm with this partner, I react. Maybe this is why I can't get pregnant, or maybe this is why I never want to XYZ. And so these things start making a lot more sense when the language of that deep core autonomic physiology becomes known to them in their higher brain. So this is the interesting thing. It's like we got the animal physiology, but we have the higher brain, and we have to, talk about mind body. Yeah. To me, that's the mind body. We have to have the intellect know this is what's happening, and this is why it's happening. And now we have to have you notice these things and not go into flee or flight or freeze mode, even though you darn well want to. Right. Unless, of course, it's a real thing and there's a bear coming at you, and then you do want it, right? But a lot of these responses are wired into us from so young. And the only way we can kind of rewire them and relearn is we have to bring that higher brain on with starting to notice how everything happens internally, as well as how all that connects with the environment.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot, and that's because it is.
It is, but it's also, I don't want to say it's easier than people think, because it is very hard. And I tell people this is the hardest work I've done, and it's the most rewarding work I've done. It's affected my life in the most profoundly beautiful ways that I couldn't have guessed at beforehand. But I did start with my therapist in Jungian psychotherapy, which I accidentally, luckily found, was like, teaching me that, and my audience has heard this a million times too, how to feel. I thought that I was so good at it because I'd been counseling for years. And like I said, I knew all the things, and I knew what was traumatizing me, and I knew all that. I had no idea how I felt at any given moment. I had no idea what it was or how to communicate it. So I was just living in almost pure disassociation from that. That's like the base level. And then, things have progressed since then to, I did EMDR and I did all this stuff, but I still work really hard just to like be in and sit in my body and notice what it's doing. And it's like this ongoing thing. And I bash myself into things, and I'm like, I have no proprioception. I do, I'm getting better. But it's like, wow, you would think way back when, no, if anyone asked me, I say, yeah, I know what I feel. And yeah, I'm in my body. Neither of those things was true. So how many of us are walking around in states like that? Like,
Most.
Whew, and
most,
there's a lot.
I would say. Yeah, it's and having been someone that came from a very athletic background, I had no clue how disconnected I was from not so much my physical capacity, but from the internal sensory mechanisms that are there to protect me, which is why I had so many injuries when I was in my 20s.
Wow.
Is I didn't have the spidey sense to say, slow down, Irene, slow down, because I was a ski racer. And it's amazing I didn't kill myself in some of the things that I've done. So something was wanting to keep me alive, but I haven't actually, even though I'm still working on healing some of those injuries, I haven't had, knock on wood, an actual injury or accident since I started bringing in the work that I do now with folk. And that's not coincidental, right? Because I still like to go fast. I still like that adrenaline, but I actually have now a sensor inside that says, okay, slow that down. Whereas before it was just like I can get through I can go down any steep couloir and be fine. And I was, but not everyone is that lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I think about even meditation, a lot of people meditate, I say that with quotes, but what I think a lot of people are doing, especially if they have never considered their somatic physiology and this whole fight, flight, freeze thing, I think a lot of folks who believe they are meditating are concentrating.
Yeah.
I know that sounds really simple, but it's like they're just concentrating on the concept of meditation,
Yes.
which occupies their mind, and then they feel that they're doing something, but they're not actually in their physical sensations. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I
And so
think
that, sorry, that can be a bit of a doozy for some, and some people will get very defensive when I say that, and I go,
people are
well,
very attached to the way that you're supposed to
yeah,
meditate. Yeah.
but meditation should not be forceful. You know, it doesn't mean that what you feel isn't lovely all the time. You might feel really deep stuff, but when you enter into it, it's like a hologram. It just should, you just hunker down. And there's a reason why in back in the day, monks weren't allowed to even learn meditation for the first 10 years. You know, it was like Karate Kid, wax on, wax off. You have to get the physical practices, the discipline, the cleaning, the hygiene, the service. And when you then can show that you have that discipline of movement and noticing, then you can sit and be, because you've done the work to get to that. And a lot of folks are teaching these higher technologies, consciousness technologies, in my opinion, too soon. And then people think, well, I must be broken because all this research shows that if I meditate 10 minutes a day, I'm going to lower my anxiety levels. It's like, well, there's another piece to this, right?
Yeah. That's why what your work that you are doing is so important in so many ways to so many people. It touches on all these beautiful aspects that the rogue warriors out here are always hearing and learning about. And so I love it
Yeah.
because they're all going to go to your channel now and learn so much more
Yay.
deeply. But I also want to
Mhm.
talk to you about, because this is fascinating to me, because I'm perceived often by the love and light crowd, I call them, as being very angry because I have really good boundaries. And I think, I mean, I'm getting better all the time, but I have some pretty good boundaries, and I also am very clear about them. And that feels to people sometimes like I'm rude or like I'm, whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm just very honest. Like, I'm not mad or whatever. And I am sometimes angry because when an injustice happens, or if someone's like harming a child or something, let's say, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm angry at you. So
of
I
course.
think, and I always say, like, I think that's a good thing. I think it's good that I have this anger, and when it's appropriate. And sometimes I have inappropriate anger, and that's not so good. And I try to be more
Hmm.
aware of that and do it less.
Hmm.
Heal the reasons why it's coming out. But when I say that anger can be good, I have a lot of people who think that I'm insane or low level or whatever. So when I saw that you have this healthy anger idea, I really want to hear about that and why you think there
Yeah.
is such a thing as healthy anger and what it can be good for.
Yeah. Well, anger is sort of one of the basic core 6 emotions that we label. You know, fear, sadness, joy, anger, disgust, and surprise. Those are like the key ones that, you know, Darwin and those guys decided, you know, whatever. Sure, there's little nuances there, but if we go back to like the mammal biology thing, again, if that mama bear is seeing her little baby cub potentially threatened, you know, by a wolf or something that would take it, she isn't going to ask for permission to be angry and go into defensive mode. She's just going to do it. And that's in us. And when we're born, this idea of healthy aggression, it comes out naturally when an infant starts to get more of their somatic sensory motor faculties on board. They start to feel their strength. Their, you know, if you've ever had a, you know, very, very little ones, not so strong, you know, they can't hold their head up, and that's for good reason because they're new. But as they get that spinal energy and that strength, and they start to be able to manipulate their hands, and I can't remember all the biochemistry of it. I'm rusty with that, but you know, certain neurotransmitters are firing more. They are like, oh, this is my energy. And again, if baby is say with mom and she's got hair like ours, and he or she is like pulling or scratching or biting, you know, nipple, breastfeeding, like that is that little one's entry point or initiation into feeling their life force, to feeling their like, I'm alive and I can act,
Yeah.
right? And so that healthy aggression, it's just built into us. The trouble is that, again, this human thing with the conditioning and the social norms and all the ways that this is supposed to happen and this isn't supposed to, or that, it messes up with that. If that mother, and I'm going to just speak as if it's the mother, but it could be the nanny, it could be the cousin, whatever, the grandma, the grandpa. But if that caregiver does not know how to feel their own life force energy, and they have never experienced that energy of I want that, or no, or let's push forward, they will, or she will see that and be like, and I'm stealing this from Peter Levine, the founder of SE, because I learned most of this via his teachings at higher levels. He said if the mom is with that baby and she pulls or bites or scratches, and if she can't be with that intensity, she will feel offended and think that the baby is trying to hurt her, and will literally look at this little thing as a monster, and like, your little monster, I'm going to put you down. Like, I'm going to divorce from you because you're being mean to me. And if you don't understand the biology, Lindsay, you may very well think I have to punish this. And there's so many things that I've heard where people have looked up online to say, well, what do you do when your baby hits you? Hit them back. Don't do that. That's what some things will say. Some will say flick them, pinch them, so that they have it's like Pavlov's dog, conditioning them to stop. But all that little one is wanting is alignment and attunement. And so in those instances, you actually want to take their little hands and play with them. How novel.
Yeah.
and kind of exclaim, look at how strong you are. Let's play a little game. And yeah, maybe it is hurting the mom, but it isn't to say, you little monster, you're hurt. They're not trying to hurt anyone.
No.
They're just expressing. And so that's the beginning of our healthy aggression. How that plays out is very dependent on the mother and her connection with her own healthy aggression and understanding this, which is not many. I'm being very general here. And so then that plays out, right? If that can't be accepted and celebrated, and then as that little one starts to express more, slaps, nope, that's not, don't do that. And of course, we don't want little people going around being, violent to everything around them. But when there is that initial acceptance of you have power and you matter, and I'm going to acknowledge it and be with it, and we're going to have some fun with it, it allows that little human to go, oh, I've been met. They see me, they feel me, and now I feel safe. I'm continuing to feel safe.
How beautiful.
And that is what we want at that beginning. And so the question, what's with this anger thing? Because so many people, it's like, let's throw love and light at it and everything will be fine.
Like the bear's just going to pray away the predator of her baby. Like,
yeah, no, like that anger and healthy aggressive impulse is so essential for humans, because it is part of our biology. And so what we have seen, if I quote the work of Dr. Gabor Mate, who's kind of put a lot of this on the map, his book, When the Body Says No, is a great read for learning about how these suppressed emotions, specifically anger and boundaries, if we don't express them and use them, it turns in, and that desire to push out goes in, and that is where we depress our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, which then impacts our digestion, our immune system, our hormones, our cardiovascular, like all of it. And so his book, When the Body Says No, is stories of him being the head of palliative care at Vancouver General Hospital a long time ago. And he would get to know these patients that were dying often very young, of MS and rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune diseases and cancers. And inevitably, they all had a very similar story, in that they did everything for everyone. They never said no. They always put everyone else first. They suffered silently. They were martyrs. And basically their exit was their body saying, screw you, I'm not doing this anymore. And the illness occurs. And he would even say, up until their days on their deathbed, they would be apologizing for them putting their families out because now they have to come to the hospital and see them and all that sort of stuff. And so this basically a lot of these patients he saw had no concept of how to be boundaried. Like you just said, like you have strong boundaries. That is very important, right? Very healthy. And we also have to be differentiated. Like if you have a child or you're taking care of someone and you just don't feel like it, then that's an issue too. It's like, okay, I'm gonna swallow the fact that I don't want to do this and I'm gonna feed my kid right now.
Yeah.
Right. And then maybe I'll have my own tantrum in the bathroom later with the shower on. Right. And so anger is incredibly important, but the trouble is most of us have seen it modeled either not at all, which is actually, I think, more common.
Yeah.
Or we see it modeled in a very violent and uncontained way where it hurts, where it has hurt us, those that were around, or just stuff around us, right?
Yeah.
And when we don't learn how to not only contain but express anger, it will come out in ways that are violent, that are abusive. Even rage, healthy rage is important, right? Because if we are, say, processing 20 years of abuse from, say, our family system, and we realize, oh my gosh, I was just forgiving them and sending them love and light, but deep down, I want to murder them all. That has to be worked on. And it does. And by the way, this doesn't mean you go and do that.
But you have to be honest about it, and hiding it or lying about it.
Yeah, it's like that animal energy is in you. And this is where people realize, why am I still sick? Why am I still unwell? Why can't I find a relationship? Like, well, are you still holding in all of that fight flight energy that is the anger stuff in your physiology? If you are, you're never going to be able to find the right path because you're basically bound like a vice grip with that high emotional energy, which is essentially sensory. Like it's when we really feel true anger, it's not an emotion. It's an act. It's an energy. It's a heat.
Yeah.
It's a growl. It's a no. It's a stomp. It's very clear. And then to work with it, Lindsay, takes time. Like you can't just say to someone, "I just want you to be angry today."
Yeah. Let it out. They're like,
let it out. Just like someone who doesn't know how to cry.
Yeah.
Right? It's like you can't say to someone, "I want you to just start crying." You haven't cried your whole life. It's the same with anger. But you can fake anger, but it's hard to fake the crying. You see where I'm going there? Yeah. So it's like, again, a lot of the things that I think are starting to leave the building, so to speak, like cathartic practices where you go to the workshop and you take the baseball bat and you hit a pillow with a group of people. I think that's starting to leave because people are realizing that that is not very nervous system informed.
It's not very authentic. Yeah.
It's not, because someone might be doing it because of peer pressure, but they're actually, there's a part of them that's terrified because they haven't done the groundwork to feel internally their actual fight flight energy, which you need to get to successfully get that healthy aggression or that stored up anger or rage out.
Yeah. It's really important. This is what I kept saying too, just from an intuitive place. Is like we can't just pretend we're not angry. That's not helpful. So if you're in like and I love the Love Light crew. For a lot of people think I'm a Love Light crew, so I have no problem with that. But if they're saying like, oh, we can't have anger and you can't express anger, and there's even a phrase in some of these different practices that's like anger burns a billion bridges or something. And I'm like, well, I mean, it also heals you when you let it out properly. And I just can't imagine. We just can't ignore our truth. And just like we were talking about, where I had to go like, oh, wow, I am really angry at my mom, actually. Like, I just didn't even know that. Like, and then I had to be honest about it for a while to let it be true for a while before I went back to Okay, yeah, I get it. It's cool. I could let that
Yeah.
go now. You have to just be honest about everything. So that's like maybe the hardest part for people, though, like we were talking about earlier, is just even knowing what they feel, why they feel it, how it feels, how to do it, or any of those things.
Yeah.
And so it's so
Yeah.
beautiful that we have people like you to guide us through that. Because who is doing it? No, nobody else is doing it. Or like we were saying, like most people don't have an experience of spirituality either, and when they do, they're
Yeah.
like, "I'm not religious, I swear." And it's like, it's okay, but we don't have examples of that, of just being spiritual and just not caring what to call it, just feel it and do it. Like
Yeah.
we need help with all of this.
We do, and I think that, it's happening. I think that slowly the old institutions, either literal or metaphorical, are starting to kind of crumble. And people, not everyone, but I'm seeing more people wanting to learn this and take responsibility for their health and their healing. And a lot of people are starting to see that chronic illness that I've been diagnosed with, or that mental illness, is not a life it doesn't have to stick with me. And this is so tricky because the medical model that was kind of put upon us in the early 1900s or whenever it was, it stole from us our intuitive capacity to heal. Alternative medicine used to be actually the medicine. And medicine is seen as the holy grail in the way that we would teach in medical school. And I am all for certain things. I would not be able to walk. I'd be crippled if I hadn't had orthopedic surgeries throughout my years to, fix the things that when I was just too stupid, or if I'm in a car accident, I'm going to want to go and get checked out to make sure there's not a brain bleed or anything like that. So that stuff is very potent and important, I think. But then there's this whole other world that is actually, I think, bigger. And, even if I walk down the street where our main hospitals are here in Vancouver, there's like a wing for every kind of ailment, like the arthritis wing and the rheumatoid arthritis and the cancer and the heart disease. And so much of what we're seeing with these illnesses is a connection to early adversity and early stress. It's so convincing, this research, that you would think you would think that it would be everywhere. Like the actual science is showing us this because it's been replicated since the 80s. That's how long it takes for things to be really shown at this level. And yet when you try to bring this even to a physician who is very aware and open, I think about my family doctor, who she's great. But I mentioned some of the research that has been written about in certain books, and it's like, it's not that she's trying to be rude. It just she doesn't think that she should know that because she's in this lane, and that's fine. And I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to come see you again unless you read this study. The ACE study is the one that I'm talking about. The adverse childhood experiences study. Every physician should know about that. Every nurse, every psychologist, every psychiatrist. But it has taken that research a long time to at least hit a little bit of a knowing, and it's better. I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but our health is very interesting to me because we actually can control a lot of it when we understand how things work inside. And some will say, well, no, no one's going to want to learn all that stuff, Irene, because why would they? And I'm like, well, some might not, but those that do are very empowered, and their lives change when they actually understand what's happening. Because we're not in the wild. We're not just animal creatures outside living off of the land. We have this world that's just been created that is very man-made, right, as we would call it. And we need help with that, right? If we want to continue using these technologies and artificial light and all the things and all the toxins, and that's another story. But yeah, it's like we need to learn about our body so that we can not only know what to do, but also learn how to listen to it. Anyway, I'm not sure
Well,
if that was a question or an answer I just
it's just a
offered you.
discussion. But it's really, I teach this too when people are learning, because I do spiritual guidance and teaching, and I'm often sharing very similar things that you're talking about, where I'm like, it's going
Mhm.
to take you addressing your physical health, and it's going to take you, and like we were talking about earlier, this whole thing, and a lot of people are like, no, I came here to like learn how to be psychic, and I'm like, it's the same thing.
It's the same
It's the
thing. You're gonna
same
get,
thing.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
and I see this from all kinds of practitioners and professionals and people who are in the sort of alternative, or that they understand that too. It actually all comes back to just being this thing that we already are. When you're talking about our central nervous system, even, and that's where these things are stored so deep down, these traumas, that makes so much sense to me too. Like that's our core, that's our antenna, that's the first part of us. I don't know how
Mm,
super realistic this is. I'm not in this area enough to know, but I just saw this picture of like, here's a sperm,
right.
here's your brain and your nervous system. They
Yeah,
look the same. Like,
yeah,
there's like the tail and all the little, and then the head, and I'm like, oh my god, like it just like
yeah.
struck me, like that is what we are. um
Well,
this is the deepest
it,
part.
it is. It's kind of it's like there's these replicas, these models. I mean, there's this beautiful image that I've seen a few times of there's a few that I'm thinking of. So one is that image of a when a tree, you see the print, right? And then they have the hand print next to it, and it's like we're connected to nature. Like, look, nature. Here's, and then the other that is maybe a bit more visual is when you see a tree, and then you have the images of all the roots going into the ground, and then they just kind of disappear. Like you said, we've got this central nervous system, which is the brain and our spinal cord, but then the peripheral nervous system is like the roots,
Mm.
and then they're big and chunky. Spinal cord is huge, and then they're big as they come out, and then they get smaller as they go to the fingers and the toes. But it's kind of the same thing. The difference between a tree and us is that we're mobilizing and moving around, and it's just in one place. um, but that, like you said, that trauma, the stuff that we get exposed to, the events, the hurts, the harms, this is where it's trickier, is that it is in the nervous system, but then it's also in the tissues, it's in the bone, it's in the fascia, it's in the muscle, it's in the organs,
Mm.
but then it's also in the pattern
Yeah.
of how that human moves in a certain way. And then it changes when that person is in this environment versus that environment. Like, you can have someone's system that's completely in a certain way in one environment, and then you put them in, a crowded restaurant, and it's loud and everything just shrinks, right? It's like, and so when you work with that, like you said, you can't separate the things.
Yeah.
And this is where like you said, it's all the same thing. But then you have to be like, okay, well, where do we start, right? How do we start to do this work with someone when there's all the things, and they're representing in, say, a sickness or an illness or something? You can't say this is exactly the steps you have to take.
Yeah.
um, you have to do a little bit of that, or else it's just a mess. But then you also have to teach them. It's like those books, Choose Your Own Adventure,
Huh.
right? You have to start with the first page, and then, depending on your system, your circumstance, because some people are in a circumstance where they shouldn't be starting this work because it's not safe where they are at this moment, right? So you kind of have to find the way to move through this work, but that core is still working with this peripheral nervous system. And then I find the mindset is important, Lindsay, in that a person has to want to do it. It's not like, if you have a bacterial infection and you have to take antibiotics, you cannot want them to work, but they're still going to work.
Yeah. Right.
Right? It's going to work. Just like a laxative, it's probably going to work. A sleeping pill that's really strong is going to work. But with this, you can plug in one of my lessons or one of your lessons, and two people will hear the exact same thing, and one person will be like, oh my God, and I felt all, and the other person's like, I don't get it.
Yeah.
Right?
Or they're even like, I hate that lady.
I hate this. And then you have to say, that's cool.
It's
If
fine.
you don't get it, that's your response. But the question is do you want to try to get it so that you can heal this thing that you know is related to your peripheral nervous system being out of whack? And then again, that's the next page on the Choose Your Own Adventure book. It's like, yes, I do. It's like, okay, well, then this means that we shouldn't start you here. We have to start you here because this is how shut down your body is. Right?
Yeah.
And then that's where it becomes more like artwork than actual science. Yeah.
And that's why so many practitioners and people won't want to do it also, is because it's too nebulous. There is, like you said, no step. It's very similar to, I think, a lot of things that are sort of cutting edge or advanced. It's maybe someday it will be more sort of, I don't know, step by step, but probably not. But I think yeah.
I think that what'll happen, because I'm seeing it a little bit in my worlds with my students, is that it's kind of like we need our common denominator. If I use fractions as an example, right? If the common denominator can be agreed upon, like this is how we should raise babies.
Yeah.
Anger is not a negative emotion. It is an emotion. It's neutral to the others. It's just different. Like if we could have a common denominator that starts to grow with more people, I think what might happen, I know, is that those people that then say have babies, right, will know that this is what you have to do. And if they're not sure, they'll ask for help. And so as that builds, I do think that this will become more common knowledge, and it's happening. And this is why these conversations are so important. It's like, if that common denominator is built, then there's a little more leeway and a little more patience for what to do on the numerator, because that numerator will be determined based on that person and their unique representation, their life experience. Everyone is different. No one has complete equality in their body because we're all different, but we also have a physiology that wants to be healthy. And typically when you start to offer it these little entry points, it does perk up. But for some, it might mean they need a week, and for others, it might take 10 years.
Yeah.
Like I personally, this January, I think, and I'm not going to jinx myself because there might be more, but I think I'm finally out of the functional freeze that I was living in since I was, I don't know how long, young. But it came out with these massive blips of sympathetic adrenalize, like I think I'm having a heart attack. Wow. Heart just like for no reason. Like I would get up from my desk here to just go over to the kitchen, and like, what? It's like I just got shot with an adrenaline, injection, and my heart was fine, hormones are fine, what's going on? And it finally leveled out. And even though my brain's working, I'm pretty sure it's working, and I feel my body and what I think is the same, there's also something that feels a little different. And my husband, who's also trained in the work I do, he's like, you're just more yourself because you just got another one of those big boluses of survival energy that you've probably been carrying since maybe in utero, but we don't know. There was no memory when that came out.
Yeah.
But I say that because someone might say, what, 10 years? What? This is going to take. It's like, don't worry, because in that process, you have little wins. You have things that are changing. And I've been pretty successful, even though I've had these things in me. It's just you have to really understand that we really don't know how much a human can store. And if there is even an end point to this healing journey.
Yeah, that's a great point.
We don't know. We just don't know. So that's where I kind of, when I hear things like, oh, I'm going to get healed. Like, okay.
You're going to do a sliver of it at least.
Yeah. It's always happening, right? Because in our day-to-day, we tear down muscles, we we have to repair every night. We're healing if we're going into good sleep. So I don't love these words where it's like I'm trying to reach enlightenment or I'm trying to get healed. Again, if it's that bacterial infection that I was mentioning,
Yeah.
then then maybe, but then you have to heal your gut because
Yeah.
you've done that too. So that's another story.
Eat some sauerkraut.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I love that idea though of this, denominator, and I'm even seeing it as like raising this up, right? And almost like the 100 monkeys thing, and also the
Yeah.
epigenetic thing, right? So if we're
Yeah.
all healing and we're doing whatever slivers and whatever slices and whatever steps we can, then everyone is sort of raising up together, and then hopefully we do get to that point where we do raise babies correctly. And
That'd be so cool.
it'd be so cool. And then we have these babies born who don't have epigenetic trauma and aren't being bombarded with new traumas, and who knows what we can accomplish. I mean, we're amazing already. We already do things that blow my mind sometimes. I'm like, someone just developed like another, bacteria or something that eats plastics in like a month instead of 10 years. And so I'm like, we're always doing these like really cool things. We're coming out with new stuff all of the time, all new treatments and everything. And yeah. So I have hope for that. And when you're talking about this, that's what I'm visualizing is like all of humanity just were, and another thing my audience hears me say all the time for years now, there's all these masters, all these ascended masters or whatever, right? They all say the same thing. They say, when you heal all of yourself, you heal all of the world. And I'm always like, they're not joking. They didn't say that for no reason. They meant it. When people are like, what do we have to do to change the world? I'm like, literally, that's it. Just heal you. That's all you have to do. It's harder than you think, but it's the only thing.
It's very simplistic in nature, but man, if you think about all of us who get hijacked into narratives and news and the drama in our families, systems, or whatever it might be, the hours, the minutes, the days, the weeks, if you could just replace that with working on self, we would have figured this out 50 years ago. So it's funny because some people are like, oh, this will never happen in our lifetime, and I'm like, well, maybe, but it doesn't take very long to educate a young generation to understand even just a little bit. And it's like you said, the 100th monkey effect. It's like all it takes, if the ship in the ocean, if it's just going 1 degree, eventually it's like completely going in another direction. So I have a hopeful element to me, and then I also have a realism element in me, because I also know that our psyche and our conditioning is often stronger than we realize. But when we really can get into this somatic work at this deeper level, something really does shift. Like I see a shift that occurs. And I also really see the shift occur when an individual welcomes that spiritual element, because I've seen and heard through the grapevine, and I've experienced this myself, that as one gets more regulated biologically, they become more connected to the universe, the multiverse, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. And it just naturally occurs. And when that happens, and I keep seeing that happen, I go, well, this is clearly, in my opinion, where we're supposed to be. But we can't be in that easily. Just like I said, the meditation thing should really come easily, but we can't when we have all these common denominators and wires that just were never properly developed at the beginning. I hope that makes sense.
And I really want, I was so lucky too. I do an event called One Day of Brightness, and the last one we did, we had someone who is also trained in somatic. I don't know if it's the exact same what you do. I know the name that you mentioned sounds really familiar from that event. And so everyone who went to that got to experience some level of how profound just very simple seeming things can be. So I hope more and more people do that. And do you offer, one-on-one with people or group things, or what types of things do you do with people?
Everything right now is pretty much group. I was in private practice for a very long time. And then about 6 years ago ish, um, I realized that people really need to learn in depth the education, the psychoeducation, and they need to practice on their own. And so, here I am in a private practice charging, where I live, we're charging up to $200 an hour just because that's how you have to charge here in this city. Um, and I'd be with someone for an hour, and half of the time I'd be, with pen and paper, explaining to them how the nervous system works and explaining to them, like having to get them to buy in to why I'm having them like do these things. And unless someone was already so willing and so into the what we would consider woo-woo, it was hard, right? But so then you have the folks that did come in and were like, I'm in. You can only do so much in an hour.
Yeah.
And you might not be able to do very much because their system's capacity is so small, and you might only be able to do 15 minutes. And like that isn't, someone has to drive across town. They have to find someone to look after their kids, and they have to drive back, and then the drive like kind of kills the session. So after a while, I'm like, I don't love this. And so what I did is I started to take all of the drawings and the audio homework I was recording for my clients. And long story short, now I've got 2 big online courses, and that's what people go through. One's smaller, one's a bit bigger. They're all on my site. So that is my main thing now, is teaching people. In a way, there is a step-by-step, but it also isn't in the way that it's been structured. And then, so there's those courses. And then of course I have tons of videos and YouTube. And then classes I teach once a month. They're very, very casual. We call them drop-in classes, and 1 hour, a theme, a little bit of theory, but it's on Zoom, guiding people through some basics. I would say that the classes are a wonderful practice, but they're not going to teach the apprenticeship. So in the 12-week program, for instance, that I have, it's called Smart Body, Smart Mind. That is like, to me, it's like a semester at university. And they're getting lectures, they're getting practicum, they're getting assignments in the form of reading, listening, doing, asking questions. We have a forum, kind of like a TA thing where they can go and ask questions, but it's all online. And we've seen people go through that program, shift massive things, like from getting off of meds to healing fibromyalgia to parenting better, headaches, just general more aliveness. I would say the key word that people will say after going through this intensive curriculum is that they're just more empowered, and their lives have completely changed because they now have that knowledge. They have the interoception, which is the fancy word for being able to sense inside. And then everything in life just changes because they see things completely different. So that's kind of our big baby, that program. We've had people from, I think, 90 countries go through it so far. We're in it right now. We're in session right now. So we'll run again. We're actually going to run again in September.
Oh, so it's not something you can just go do anytime. There's start and end, and
it's like a semester at university. You got it. So that is distinct, and that we're going through it live. And then if anyone wants to begin our little course, it's called the 21-day nervous system tune-up. That's been curated from the 12-week program. And so there's a selection of 5 video trainings and 9, I call them neurosensory exercises, which are basically in service to teaching a person how to be with their peripheral nervous system. And then there's movement as well. So that, I think, is probably one of the more distinct pieces to the work I offer. It's not just sitting and trying to notice. We're bringing in my Feldenkrais background to teach someone how to learn again, if that makes sense. And our movement when we were babies is how we originally learned, by feeling, touching, pulling, rolling, looking. And so we get into some of the more developmental aspects of feeling the body, opening it up, not in an exercise stretching way, but a very subtle, gentle way. And then the other element to the programs is we're working with something that I call the stress organs. So if we think about that little baby that I talked about that maybe came out and was like forceps and had a medical trauma or something, that survival stress and that insult, it's not in their brain. It's not in their emotions. It's in the organs. It's in their little kidneys and adrenals that are pumping out adrenaline and cortisol. It's in their gut that completely clenches. It's in their heart that's just like pounding or has no tone and is kind of slowing down. And so within the larger course, we get into working with those organs directly through intention and very gentle touch, maybe a little bit of movement. And then that work was brought to me via one of Peter Levine's colleagues, Kathy Kane. And so she was kind of like the godmother, if you will, of bringing this very gentle, subtle stress organ work to that somatic healing world, because sometimes there's no talking, like there's nothing to say because the traumas were so young. And so you have to work with these structures that I've been mentioning. And that, I would say, is another very unique difference to the work that I am bringing into this online space. So
how cool.
That's a very kind of quick macro. All of it's on my site. Super easy to find.
Yeah, remind us of your site and your YouTube channel as well.
Yeah, it's just my name, just Irene, Irene, Lyon with a Y, no S.com. Beautiful. And that's the YouTube channel. All of it's there. Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, kind of on there, but not.
Yeah.
Facebook. But yeah, YouTube is like, there's hundreds.
You have like a library of education
of videos. And,
yeah.
Yeah. Playlists are there that have some things compiled. There's a whole playlist just on anger and healthy aggression. So if someone wants to just binge that, do that. I will say one thing though, when you go into the content, treat it like an experiential thing, because you can actually start shifting things by listening to how your body responds to the information. And some people may have even felt today, as they're listening to this, something, they might feel something happening just by hearing. And that's why the education is actually really important.
What a beautiful point. That's so important.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Education is number one. Because what I have found, again, not and everyone's a little different, but our intellect is very smart. And so when you give a human the inner workings of how their body actually works, and we know this is how it works, something kind of lights up. And that's been my experience when people just learn the basics of what fight, flight, and freeze is, for example. Why they can't feel or notice a memory, it's because their stuff was before they could speak, before memories were formed. That can help a lot of people when they feel like they're just broken because they can't remember the trauma. It's like, well, you might not ever remember it because it was pre-verbal, it was pre-cog, right? Precognition. And just knowing that alone can kind of take the pressure off. And then they're like, oh, that's why I wake up in the middle of the night panicked, right? It's not because of the fact that I didn't drink enough chamomile tea. It's because my nervous system is expressing an old hurt that was like, we're going to die. And it's like waking up in the middle of the night because it maybe replicates when something bad happened. So yeah, education is like super duper important.
Super important. Yeah. That's really powerful too. You know, like I said earlier, I think I had a traumatic memory release, but like I think we also touched on, I don't know what actually happened. I just know that something from really far back happened and I released it and I understood the feeling of it. I understood like where it was in my body and I haven't learned any of the things you're talking about. I had little bits, right?
Yeah.
And then now today a bit more of a bit, but not enough. But I just understood, okay, that's what's happening and I just let it be that. And who knows, maybe there's more in there to release. But afterwards, I was like, oh, and what's really interesting to me is I was having migraines. I started having migraines, and then this release happened, and I haven't had a migraine since then. Cross my fingers. Hopefully
Cool.
that's why.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
but that just kind of happened, even I'll say like accidentally or somewhat
Mm-hmm.
intuitively,
Mm-hmm.
probably because of the other types of trauma release type training or things I've done. And lucky me, but there was a lot of steps on the way to get there. But I just, like
Yeah.
you're saying, I think knowing more, learning more, each step builds on each step. And then also our, like you're talking about, we have our own internal intuition, our own body's way of doing these things. There was someone who first never had heard of Feldenkrais or, you know, somatic anything and was doing it. So we have that too, but we want to activate it. And I love the idea of your course. I really want to do that. When people do that too, do you find that they are then sharing it with others and helping others find little bits and pieces of it along the way?
It's so unique to the person. Like, I just had a note from a mom in my Smart Body, Smart Mind course who, something along the lines of, now that I'm doing this for myself, I'm parenting better. It's just,
I love
and it's not because you're sitting, little Susie down and saying, okay, now we're going to do this breath.
that. Yeah.
No, right? It has nothing to do with that. It's just that mother's energy and biology is different, and she is seeing the little one differently, and by that the little one interacts with her differently. But then I'm also like, I have a good friend who, went through Smart Body, Smart Mind last year. She is a Feldenkrais practitioner as well. We met through that. And she is an educator. Like, she works with school districts and coaching. And she's teaching these school teachers the basics of fight. She's not doing trauma work with them, but she's like, we need to bring this thing online for kids called social engagement, which is part of our parasympathetic nervous system that allows them to learn. But if we just sit them into a chair, first thing, without any movement, any expression or connection with each other, they're just going to be in their little tunnels and still bringing in, the home life, which maybe isn't that good or whatever it might be. So I'm like, people are finding their ways, of transmitting the information. But then, of course, to work with someone specifically is a whole other story.
Yeah.
And that is one thing that I am sadly seeing a few too many people. I don't know if they're my students, other people's students, but teaching and saying that they're doing this work,
They're not.
but they're not trained. And one thing that, and I'll just state this because I have to, is, just because one person has healed something or has released something in their own bodies does not teach them how to work with others. And I'm going to be very solid with that boundary, because anything could happen in another person. How it happened with you is accurate. It's real. Yes, it happened. Wonderful. That does not create someone who is, it's like saying, I had surgery the other day. Now I'm going to I'm going to be a doctor and be a surgeon. It's like, no. And so that's an interesting part, Lindsay, because as we've been talking about, like, this is new, and there's no structured school or professional institution for what I do.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist, not yet.
You're creating it.
So that's my hope, is to create that. We're going to start something in the next year. But to get to where I'm at, or my colleagues, you have to travel and find teachers and sniff out what you need and practice and tinker and get consultation constantly, do your own work. And not many folk have that kind of academic drive to continue that. So for those that might be like, oh, I really want to do some of this work, how do I find a practitioner? One of the best things a person can do is to start learning through my materials, even if it's just YouTube, so that you get more knowledge on board, and then you can better ask questions of a future practitioner.
Smart.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like you need to interview the person that you work with or might work with, so that you know that they're actually solid and educated and trained, and they're doing their own personal work. as well, because it's not like a surgeon. Like even a surgeon can be a specialist at knee surgery, and they maybe have never had a knee surgery,
Yeah.
but they're super good at that, right? And this work is a bit different. Yeah.
Much more different. Plus, I like you said, not everyone has that academic approach. I think there's also something to be said of the, there's like a idea of and the practice of being professional as well that is very different from what most people are used to in most of their jobs or practices.
Yeah.
I hope I said that right, but it's very different from just casually helping a friend figure out a problem or something, right?
Totally.
To be of service at that level. So there's that whole thing too, I'm sure, is not even what you're teaching people. So that would be another reason why it would not very much be appropriate for you to then go practice in that way.
No, you're right. I would say that the idea of having professionalism and being a professional, it kind of might have a, like we said, we're trying to get away from this medical sick model.
The mafia,
and so someone might be like, well, I don't want to do that because doctors have been trained for 4, 5, 6 years and look at the damage they might be doing. It's like, well, okay. and this work is actually pretty delicate, and it is actually quite complex. And it's really hard to convey that at the beginning. But I started this journey of working with humans in 1997 in fitness. I started teaching right after that, and then the mind body stuff came in 2004 with Feldenkrais, and then SE in 2008. I mean, this is like 20 plus years.
Right.
I don't think that it needs to take that long for someone to become a professional. I just think what's been missing is the path, the structured path, like medical school is very structured for good reason. Right. And so that's what we need to create for this to push forward.
And on the other hand, that ripple effect we were talking about of the people who are taking this course and then helping themselves and how it's affecting their relationships with others, and then the 100th monkey and all of this lifting up of the bottom, and the whole of humanity is going to be affected. That is happening. Either way, that's the beautiful, beautiful gift that you're able to give to everyone. So I'm so excited. I want to go take the course. Maybe I'll be joining you in September. But so we shared how people can connect with you and where to connect with you best and what you have to offer them. And we even talked about what your hope is for where the world goes from here incidentally before. But the final thing I like to ask people is, what are your final words of wisdom or your final thoughts that you want to leave people thinking about before we say goodnight?
Do your work. Really do your work and know that there's work to be done, and to welcome it in as if you're learning something that is so, so important, because it is. And there's so much empowerment when we learn about our biology and become connected to it. And inevitably, if we don't do that, we're going to end up with some troubles. So do your work, do the work, whatever that might be. I, of course, am biased towards the work that I and my colleagues do, which is more nervous system, somatic based. But for some people, it might mean, just going to a class to learn how to move properly or to dance. Like it can be something, with the body, with your system, doesn't have to be with people. This is the other thing, right? Like sometimes if our wounds were from relationship, I'm not saying you have to go and like date or dance with, maybe it's just learning something online. Maybe it's just going for a walk and actually walking without your phone and looking at the sky and feeling the ground under your feet and those sorts of things. So I believe that we need to just really keep working on ourselves, and it does get easier. That's the other thing. But it's that hump. Sometimes it can be a little hard to get out of that conditioned response. So start doing something, whether it's through my work or your work, Lindsay, or all of the people out there that are teaching and healing and educating.
Very Very well said. Beautiful sentiment. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog electric concentric dose of wisdom, according to the healer of healers, Irene Lyon. Irene, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It's been very, very beautiful.
Oh, you're so welcome. It was very fun.
Well, connecting inward is the place of all healing. That's where the trauma is. That's where the monsters hide. That's where your shining strength resides. The fear of looking inward is that we will see that we are weak and incapable and that we will have to run away again, but this time knowing that we failed. But instead, what we find is that the hardest part was simply looking in the first place, that we can only find strength within, and that our power increases exponentially with that level of honesty and simple witnessing that we can offer ourselves at any time we choose. Be the witness, know your strength, and find yourself within, and until you do, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
Yo, yo, you're lying, he's lying, and she's lying. My man over there, he's lying. You know what? You're building up a bunch of lies. Straight lies. You don't know Willie Brown. I don't believe you. You're gonna build a wall. I don't believe you. You smash corn pop. I don't believe you. You don't touch kids. I don't believe you. Tupac's your favorite rapper. I don't believe you. You're helping immigrants. I don't believe you. Unemployment's low. I don't believe you. You're gonna fix the climate. I don't believe you. You carry hot sauce. I don't believe you. You pulling troops out. I don't believe you. America is great again. I don't believe you. You don't take cash from China. I don't believe you. You pay taxes. I don't believe you. You care about us. I don't believe you. There's a virus. I don't believe you. You need to wear a mask. I don't believe you. Here's a stimulus. I don't believe you. You're gonna impeach someone. I don't believe you. Heads are gonna roll now. I don't believe you. We're gonna flatten curves. I don't believe you. You're helping black people. I don't believe you. Voting matters. I don't believe you. You never took that flight. I don't believe you. We're all in this together. I don't believe you. You don't have dementia. I don't believe you. You make the best deals. I don't believe you. You're gonna solve the problem. I don't believe you. You're gonna drain the swamp. I don't believe you. We're training space soldiers. I don't believe you. You're friends with Mexicans. I don't believe you. You're different this time. I don't believe you. We're fixing infrastructure. I don't believe you. You'll get free college. I don't believe you. Your hands are huge. I don't believe you. Erasing student debt. I don't believe you. You're not establishment. I don't believe you. You don't have Kuru. I don't believe you. You have nice friends. I don't believe you. You won't bomb anyone. I don't believe you. We don't spy on people. I don't believe you. There's a tax credit. I don't believe you. You're a Christian. I don't believe you. You'll fix the deficit. I don't believe you. The other side's the problem. I don't believe you. You got transparency. I don't believe you. You're not a puppet. I don't believe you. You don't know a Rothschild. I don't believe you. Safe and effective. I don't believe you. I'll circle back to that. I don't believe you. It's a pandemic. I don't believe you. We care about your health. I don't believe you. They're killing grandmas. I don't believe you. Birthing person. I don't believe you. We'll investigate. I don't believe you. You don't know that guy. I don't believe you. You trust the science. I don't believe you. You want us all in shackles. We're training space soldiers. You're friends with Mexicans. God damn it.